So we are beginning to see persecution from government. This is the most formidable persecution. Nothing new. 1660, the Covenanters signed their national covenant with their blood to resist to the death the claims of the king, to override the crown rights of the Redeemer and his church, King Jesus.
The government wanted to impress on people, look what happens. Brown was betrayed. Margaret Wilson and her younger sister Agnes, they were known to be Covenanting sympathisers. Difficult to know how many were actually executed. Why would you die for church polity? Says to every authoritarian government, there is a power and authority higher than you. Our calling is not first to comply with your laws. We must obey God rather than men.
Hi, my name is Shannon Halliday. I'm with the Essential Church, and you're on the Grace Productions channel, and we are live with Jay Bhattacharya, and we're looking forward to this interview. Jay, how are you?
I'm doing well, Shannon. It's so good to talk with you.
Yeah, you as well. I'm so glad you're able to join us. So you were able to join us this past Sunday at our premiere at Grace Community Church, and I think there was probably 4,000 to 5,000 people there that evening. I don't know if I'll ever have a premiere that big in my lifetime. They're usually not that big. It was amazing. It was an amazing, and you're a big part of the documentary. We were able to go up there and interview you at Stanford at the Hoover Institute. And so I was curious. Well, first off, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself for those who maybe don't know who you are, what you do, and where you practice?
Sure. So I am a professor at the School of Medicine at Stanford. I've been here like 37 years, 20 some years as a professor. I do research. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm a health policy guy. I have MD and a PhD in economics. And during the pandemic, I've been very vocal against the lockdown policies that we followed as ineffective and harmful. I participated in a number of important cases as an expert on the side of churches. So when you guys approached me to talk about sort of the mistakes that we made as epidemiologists in policymaking, I was absolutely delighted, Shannon. It was just an honor, and that evening, the premiere was just electric. It was incredible, Shannon. I mean, like thousands of people watching together this story that I think everyone should know, that we should remember. It was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I was elated when they told me Jay's going to come. I was like, really? He's going to be able to make it? That's amazing. That just made my day. Yeah, so I'm so glad you were able to make it. So what were your expectations going into this? We come to you, hey, this is a church. We're doing a documentary with you, and What did you think this film was going to? What were your expectations going into this?
I mean, I'm not a Hollywood guy. Before 2020, I don't think I was ever on TV. I was like maybe once, and my mom was like, the only person watching. Um, I never imagined being part of something with a production so professionally done. I've been on TV now a bunch during the pandemic, and it's nothing like this. Like the experience of this was where you can tell a story from beginning to end, and to be a part of that it was incredible. Like when I'm not as far as like when I met you guys, I expected it to be a professional production. That I knew. What I didn't expect was the emotional impact of watching that production, telling the story that I've been at least peripherally involved with, and then the other part I didn't expect was how you connected it in this emotional, visceral way to church history. I thought that was fantastic, Shannon. I thought, I'm a Christian. I have been dismayed to see how little resistance the churches around the world had to being called non-essential. That's why I participated in these lawsuits as an expert. All of this pro bono because I didn't feel right taking money for it. But I thought it was just wrong that the churches would give up its purpose, which is to meet, to be in fellowship with each other without a fight. It was for me watching. I'm in Northern California. I don't attend Grace. Watching the fight that Grace had to successfully fight back when so many churches didn't was very heartening. So I knew that was going to be there, but I didn't expect you to connect it to church history in the way you did. And that really brings the contrast out, doesn't it? How did how did other Christians deal with authoritarian governments? How did we deal with it?
Yeah. And you show the they wanted to accomplish with the film. I remember when I took on this project, and obviously I went straight to the statement that we released. I had read it before because I attend Grace. But when I went and just kind of really combed over it and looked at it in more detail, I saw these references to church history, specifically the Covenanters in the 1600s, and also the Great Ejection with the Puritans. There was over 2,000 pastors ejected from their pulpits in 1662 because they refused to submit to the fact that the state was essentially going to run the church and regulate worship. When I saw that, I thought, this has to be bigger than Grace Community Church. And I wanted to make it because it is. It's about the church. It's not about Grace Community Church. Our story is a part of it, but, it was important that we look to the past and we learn from the past because these folks had to flesh out this and honestly, to the point of their own death over 100 years there throughout the entire 1600s and suffered greatly over a simple doctrine that I think pastors and people are so willing to compromise the head of the church. Temporarily give that headship over to the state when they deem it necessary, and so of course not. It's meant to put steel in our veins when we look at the church history and make sure that, hey, are we carrying that baton forward that they carried? And we see that in the Canadians, and that's the other global aspect that I wanted to put out there is that our Canadian friends got it a lot worse than we did. They actually, the government went after them and put them in jail as those but that was important to me. So you were attacked pretty hard when you came out saying, really, you just said, hey, I think the narrative that's out there in the mainstream media isn't the best advice. And I don't think it's scientific. And it's actually going to hurt people. And you created something called the Great Barrington Declaration, which I included in the documentary. Tell me about that and what you did with that.
Sure. So the Great Barrington Declaration it's actually a statement of like what we normally do with this kind of pandemic. For a century, we follow the same model. A, find out who's vulnerable and work to protect them. B, don't panic the rest of society because the harms, the health harms of that will end up being worse than whatever you think you're saving against. Don't essentially and then in the meantime develop countermeasures to like so that we do better to protect people and treat people when they do get sick. That's all the sensible way that we manage pandemics for a century. Like so in you don't have to go back that far. Like 2009, the H1N1 swine flu pandemic. In 1968, we had an enormous flu pandemic in the United States. At the same time, there was Woodstock. It's not like we have a history of the kind of draconian policies that we followed. It was a departure from standard pandemic practice. So the Great Barrington Declaration just said, look, we know that it's older people that are really the most vulnerable, so take action to protect older people. But at the same time, we also know that the kinds of lockdown policies that we've been following, closing schools, closing businesses, telling churches that are not essential, those kinds of policies actually end up harming the health of the population. And we see it now. We see women coming in with late stage cancer that should have been caught, 3 years ago in a screening test. We see children year or more behind in school, especially poor children. We see working class people that lost their jobs. We see, and if you move outside the United States, the economic dislocation caused by lockdowns, it put 130 million or more people into risk of starvation to save whose health? And we didn't really protect against COVID either. We still had COVID everywhere. The lockdowns, the idea was to protect vulnerable older people with them. It didn't work. So that was the Great Barrington Declaration. Lift the lockdowns, refocus our efforts on older people who are the highest risk, and don't harm children, don't harm working class people, don't harm vulnerable people with the lockdown.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And we're appreciative of you guys doing that. And I mean, how many people have signed the Great Barrington Declaration to this day?
Almost 1 million people. It was remarkable. That is one of those things where like you're talking about you'll never have a premiere. I don't think I'll ever write something that's signed by 1 million people again. Just at least I hope
not. Yeah. Okay, so you come out with this and you're speaking out against this. Twitter was owned by somebody else at that time. What happened to you as a result of and I don't really get into that too much in the documentary. It would have been a rabbit trail, and I wanted to stay focused on the church as our protagonist in this story and move forward. But you had quite a story there. I mean, we could do a documentary on you alone and Scott Atlas and what you guys went through. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what you've gone through by stance?
So it was emotionally traumatic. I mean, it was like on the one hand, it's really quite a privilege to be able to express some ideas and have it resonate with so many people. You don't really get that opportunity so many times in your life as a scientist. And the Great Barrington Declaration, as I said, almost 1 million people signed it. Tens of thousands of physicians and epidemiologists signed it. And it really sort of articulated the counterpoint to the lockdown-focused strategies. At the same time, the way that the government handled it was essentially a violation of basic civil liberties. It's just the same way that they violated the civil liberties of churches. They also violated the civil liberties of scientists. So 4 days after we wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, Francis Collins, the head of the National Institute of Health, and very famously a Christian, wrote to Tony Fauci, calling me, Sunetra Gupta, and Martin Kulldorff, the three of us who wrote the declaration, called three of us, from Stanford, Harvard, and Oxford, fringe epidemiologists. And then he called for a devastating takedown of the premises of the declaration. Then I started getting hit pieces on me from mainstream sources, Washington Post, New York Times, essentially mischaracterizing the declaration as a let it rip document rather than a call for better protection of elderly people. I started getting death threats. Every time I would appear on TV, I would get nasty hate mail. Some of it racist, go back to your home country kind of emails. It was really quite stressful. I mean, it was one of those things where instead of having an open, honest discussion among scientists about what the right thing to do was. Instead, it was like this smearing, this attack to try to delegitimize the entire point of view. And on Twitter, I wasn't on Twitter in October 2020, but my colleague Martin was. He started getting censored. He's a very famous Harvard professor, and his ideas about the pandemic are different than Tony Fauci's. But he would start getting labels put on for things that were factually true. Like if you have COVID and recover, you actually have some pretty good protection. You have some immunity. That's a fact. I mean, but yet you could get censored for that. You could get censored for saying that the masks don't particularly work well, especially on children, or that there's no good high quality evidence in favor of them stopping disease spread, which is absolutely true. I mean, these are just true facts if you look at the scientific literature, and yet you got censored. I joined Twitter in August of 2021, in part because Martin was afraid that he might get kicked off Twitter for saying true things. And we wanted some presence on Twitter from the Great Barrington folks. And so but it turns out, I learned in retrospect that the government had put me on a blacklist the day I joined Twitter. They put me on the idea was to make sure that people didn't see my tweets. So even though I thought I was doing fine with tweets, I'm now involved with a lawsuit against the federal government brought by the Missouri and Louisiana Attorney General's offices. And what we've uncovered is a vast censorship industrial complex, an enterprise involving a dozen federal agencies, where including the White House itself, where they're directing social media companies not who to censor and what to censor. They're telling them, look, it's so dangerous that you let these people on to talk about true facts because those true facts might undermine demand for the vaccine or something, and therefore you should censor these people even though they're not saying anything false. It's to me, it's just absolutely chilling, right? So a government that violates the basic civil liberties of churches, I guess maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, would also violate other basic civil liberties as well. And that's exactly what we've seen during this pandemic.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, maybe you can't speak to this. I don't know. You're in court with it right now, but who do you think is ultimately behind it? Why would all these federal agencies, the White House and all this, why do they do that? Why would they do this? Are they answering to somebody, or what's their motive? In fact, John MacArthur asked that question in the film. If you remember, towards the climax of the film, he wants to know doing this. So I guess that's my question. Why do you think they're doing this?
I mean, I think there's multiple motives involved. I mean, obviously there are motives involving money, the pharmaceutical companies involved, that automatically is going to involve this. But I think if you try to get to the heart of it, like the root of it, it's actually not rooted in people who you say, oh, look, they have these malign motives and they're bad guys, Dr. Evil. No, what they are people that think that they are so wise that they can order the universe to protect everybody. They're doing it out of their sense of benevolence, misguided as it is. And they're so certain about their truth of what they believe. Like you remember Tony Fauci very famously at one point in response to questioning said, well, if you question me, you're not simply questioning a man, you are questioning science itself, right? It's the kind of hubris that comes from that is the kind of thing that where that hubris leads people to do things that are utterly out of line. And I think that's really the heart of that whole censorship industrial complex. A whole bunch of people in federal agencies thought they were doing good by violating civil liberties, and that's why they did it.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration weaponized it. Like they weaponized this whole regime so that if you ever got tagged on Facebook or put in Facebook jail because you shared some story about the pandemic, it's because of this regime, right? They essentially threatened these social media companies that if they didn't comply, that they would be regulated, maybe even out of existence.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there could be, like you said, a lot of motives. And if you go with one of those motives that they're convinced that they're the good guys, as you say, and I'm sure there's some who think that, it's ironic because RFK Jr. recently said, the good guys are never the ones who introduce totalitarianism into society. The totalitarianism is never the good guys. So it's ironic they think that when actually they're taking totalitarian approach and introducing that and giving government that kind of power over the individual and over churches. It's scary. So you were blacklisted, banned from Twitter. Um, then things changed. Somebody bought Twitter. His name's Elon Musk. And things started to be brought out into the open. They started doing these investigations, the Twitter files, right? And you were tell me about that.
Sure. When Elon Musk, I think he originally said he was going to buy Twitter in like mid 2022, made an offer, then got cold feet, and then like the court forced him to buy it for $44 billion. He buys Twitter, but then when he buys it, he leaps in with both feet. Like he essentially opens the doors to independent journalists to see what Twitter 1.0 was doing, what they like their activities in this kind of censorship. And a friend of mine named Barry Weiss, she runs something called the Free Press. She was one of the first independent journalists let in by Elon Musk, and she found my name in this database with this blacklist, and found out I was blacklisted the day I joined Twitter. Like, what did I do to warrant the blacklist? I think the answer is that the government essentially wanted me on a blacklist. And Twitter had to comply. Yeah. And so like it's funny is like when he opened this up, the story came out, and then I got all this press attention over Christmas 2022, and I thought I was going to have a relaxing Christmas. Turns out I get to be in the media again. And I get a message from Elon sort of indirectly to inviting me up to Twitter headquarters. So I drove up. It's about 30, 35 miles up the peninsula to Twitter headquarters, and the whole drive I'm thinking this drive cost Elon Musk $44 billion. And so it was it was remarkable. I got to see the database with blacklist next to my name, and then I got to talk with Elon to find out why did he do it. He's bought himself a whole host of trouble, and his view is that these civil liberties are fundamental to our civilization, and our civilization can't survive without it. And that's the main motive he had for buying Twitter is to make a public square where people can just meet and talk and share ideas, even if they're wrong. Often we share ideas that are wrong. Isn't that part of being human?
Right.
You don't have a group of people who decide that they're so wise, so benevolent that they can overrule the wisdom of everybody else. I think the reason why the movie resonated so much with me, Shannon, at some level, there's a deep humility in saying, look, there is a power above us that created us, that created the universe, that we are nothing in terms of its wisdom, of his wisdom, that we are to have some humility in the face of human knowledge, human capacity for ordering the universe, and that humility, I think, is actually absolutely essential for a well-functioning society. I think as a Christian, it's more than that, but I think it is at least that. And so I think it's I think that movie, your movie, Shannon, the way it's just a reminder that there's more to this life than we can even know as scientists. Like it's not enough. We're not wise enough as scientists to order the universe. To me, it's just amazing to be able to have been part of that story a little bit, to fight back, because we as scientists, I love science. Science is beautiful. It's an important, interesting thing, but it's not sufficient to give me enough knowledge to order how whether Grace Church should open or close. Right? That should be something that's a matter for prudence and wisdom, and that you guys should have a say in. My church should have a say in whether it should not be something that the government tells us, oh yeah, you're inessential, don't open.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like we most definitely, I think some people look at us and they say, you're telling people that they have to do church the way you want them to do it. And what we did was, all we said is, no, we're just not letting the government control us. We're going to open, and the individual can decide what they need to do. We'll have masks if they want masks. If they want hand sanitizer, we'll have that. We're not going to sit there and argue those facts about masks with them. It kind of seemed fruitless at the time. The point is the church is going to be open, and you can come with a mask or not with a mask. You can social distance if you want to social distance. You can go out into the tent. We had a tent in the parking lot. You could be in the tent. We didn't force everybody to go inside. We just treated everybody like adults and said, you can decide what you need to decide for your medical safety. You know your medical health and what you're getting into, and you've heard what's out there, and you can deduce what you need to do. The church is going to be open. The head of church is Christ and not to regulate our worship. So, yeah,
that's the thing about
it was
that.
a blessing. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. There's just a deep humility in that, right? I mean, like the humility is in that like you're not telling everybody here you must do it this way. You're just saying our purpose is to have church. Our purpose is to worship God. Our purpose is to acknowledge the headship of Christ in the church. I mean, I think that there's. I mean, it struck me so forcefully. I mean, it's like the core civil liberty, Shannon. I think if you don't have that that right to worship, this bright line where the government can't say you can't do this basic fundamental thing that's so fundamental to basically every human. All of us, Christian or not, worship in some way. And to say for the government to say you can't do that, it's not essential to you. That means that the government can just do anything. Like there isn't a limit.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's so true. You know, I'm curious where you're at now. So there was definitely, you were persecuted for your stance, and you had a rough time of it. I think you mentioned at the dinner. Actually, that's an interesting thing. I forgot about that. We had a dinner afterwards, and I remember thinking, this is probably never going to happen again. And I'm having a dinner with John MacArthur, Jay Bhattacharya, Sean Kaufman, and James Coates and Tim Stevens. Those are the two pastors from Canada that went to prison, and their wives were there. And Chris Hamilton, our chair elder, and we're all there. And I get to be, God is so merciful to me. He's like, you can be a part of this, and allowed me to be a fly on the wall and listen to you guys talk about the stories and what you went through. And what did you think about that?
First, I was in awe of being in the presence of those two Canadian pastors. I mean, John MacArthur, of course, but I already knew about him before the pandemic. But like those two Canadian pastors, they put their lives on the line for their faith, and it comes out in your film, and you can see the family of I think it was Coates, where he's like they're crying as he's being sent off to jail.
Tim Stevens.
Oh, Stevens. It was Stevens that was
Tim
yeah.
Stevens.
But then Coates coming out of jail and his family hugging him, obviously like deprived of him for a month. He's in and they put him in a maximum security cell with like rapists and murderers or something, as if he'd done something so wrong. They lived their faith, and to be in their presence, I mean, you just felt this sense of like real true sacrifice and humility too in the midst of it. That dinner was incredible. I'm never going to forget it, Shannon.
Yeah, it was so special. And you're right about those pastors. I mean, when they were put in jail, they knew that they could actually be there anywhere from 2 to 5 years. They didn't know when they were going to get out. They didn't know if they were going to see their wives and their kids again. When they were taken away, there was no guarantee. And I think in our safety and having hindsight, we think of it that way. It's like, okay, so they sat in a jail cell for a little while and kicked back, and then they knew they were going to get out, and then it's not a big deal. No, it was a big deal. They had a lot on the line. They didn't know what was going to happen. They could have, and they said, I'm going to stand for the truth. And if anybody has somewhat of a connection, I mean, they didn't lose their life like so many did in the Scottish Covenanters era. But, I mean, they really felt the brunt of persecution. And that's why it was so important to keep them in the story. I mean, without them, the story would not be the story, because you need to show the stakes in a story. And they show the real stakes for the pastors. And there are two pastors, but globally there were things like that going on all over. And that's what's so weird about this, about that in history, in world history. Has there ever been a time when all the governments together shut down everything and in the process also down the church? I mean, when has the church been shut down like that globally? I mean, it was so weird. And as somebody, one thing I want people to come away from the way the film is The Essential Church. It's you can learn more about it at essentialchurch.com, and it comes out in theaters across America on July 28th, this Friday. And that's not the only showing. It has a run. That's just opening night. So go to essentialchurch.com. You can click purchase tickets or something like that, and it will take you to a list of theaters. You can put in your zip code, and you can see if there's a theater near you. But what I was saying was that, that was going on all over the globe. And it's so interesting because I think other people who don't have a spiritual mindset, who aren't Christians, will look at that and say it's just all neutral, nothing really going on. But as Christians, I know there is a conflict, a cosmic conflict, an ancient conflict, and it absolutely is part of our world here. And so when something like that happens, I wake up and go, wait a second, this is weird. And that's one thing I wanted people to walk away from the film, is that spiritual warfare involving, including the sphere of dealing with we have to understand, discern what is being communicated, what is going on. We aren't called to blindly follow them. There are times when we can disobey the government, and this was one of those times. But I want to thank you for coming on. And please share some more thoughts, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, I think back through church history. There's just example after example of faithful people standing up to authoritarian power in the name of church, right? So, Martin Luther King is in jail in Birmingham for months. You mentioned Paul Bunyan in the movie, right? Very famously spent years in jail as a Covenanter. I mean, I think
12 years.
12 years in jail as a covenant because he didn't want to say, look, the king is the head of the church. It's Christ is the head of the church, he wanted to say, right? That was the principle.
Yeah, I mean, that, and they said, if you can't go out and keep preaching, which was the connection to him and James, because they said you could leave as long as you don't preach. And he refused to agree to that, which is what James Coates did. He refused to admit, okay, I'm going to stop preaching, because he's going to go out and preach. So he's not going to lie. So that's why he couldn't leave. And that's the connection there between him and John Bunyan.
And you could go back to the very beginning of Christianity. You got Paul sitting in jail for days, longer. Actually, he dies in a Roman prison, right? It's like St. Paul. So you have this example of Christians sacrificing themselves, even under the point of death or jail, in order to stand up to totalitarian governments. And in the 20th century, the churches in the Soviet Union or the Chinese church, or now the African churches that are under persecution you see example after example, and you never think they would come to the United States. And yet, I was involved with a case, Shannon, where the Santa Clara County, California, essentially told people that they weren't allowed to have home Bible study because it was too dangerous for multiple families to mix and have Bible study. What right does the government have to tell you that you can't have a Bible study in your own home? A government that can do that will do anything. I think this movie is so important, Shannon. I'm grateful for you for writing it, for directing it, and grateful to Grace Church for putting it together, because it'll be a document people will remember.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I wanted it to be timeless, and the feedback I'm getting has been really encouraging, because that's what some people have said to me. And that's what I pray that it does. That 20 years from now, it's still something that is applicable, and I think it will be. There's something you mentioned about examples in the Bible and things like that, and I thought of Exodus, and then I thought of Daniel. You have Exodus where the government is saying, "No, I control these people, and they will do what I want them to do." And God says to Pharaoh, the government, "No, No, they're not yours. They're mine. And I'm going to take them with me and they're going to do what they're going to do. And the state did not like that. And then he made an example of that state. And in Daniel, he is told that he's not supposed to pray. And what is he? He opens his windows. Not only does he continue to pray, but he lets everybody know, I'm praying. And he does it 3 times a day so the whole city can see him. And he defies the government mandate. They were regulating his worship. They were regulating what he should do concerning what he believes to be true about spiritual truth, and he's doing it. He's praying, and they're trying to control that, and he says, no, I'm not going to submit to your temporary mandate. So there are so many clear examples there that I don't really understand when people say that there's no way a Christian should ever disobey the government. There are examples throughout history and throughout God's word that there are times when we can defy the government.
I mean, I think the key thing is if the government is acting in a way where it's not actually legitimate, right? They're legitimate government powers, and we have to respect it. Like the government has the right to tax, or the obligation to keep peace, enforce justice.
Yeah.
All of that is good, and we stand behind that. But when the government acts in ways that are out of line with where it's legitimate authority, telling people not that they can't have Bible study in their homes, you have to act in opposition. Whatever, I mean, and often that means self-sacrifice, resistance. That kind of resistance, I think, ultimately is very, it's ultimately like the best way to overturn authoritarian ideas, right? It's not by violent insurrection. It's by setting example of commitment to what your beliefs, your faith, your principles, and to the point where you're willing to sacrifice yourself for it. There's nothing I think more powerful on earth, anyways.
Yeah. And it made me think of something when you said that, it made me think about how you're dealing with Romans 13, and it says, to submit to the authorities. But we deal with that in the documentary, and there we had an evolution at our own church, and I think I think the documentary is unique because it pulls back the curtain on our process that our elders went through, and they actually were very much divided. It was this this thing that was tied up in a nice little bow, and everybody agreed. It was very messy. They had to work through these things, and we show the evolution on Romans 13, of submitting, and the division around that, and how they became united. And I think those who know about Grace Community Church, those who don't know anything about Grace Community Church, this may not mean anything to them, but those who know Grace Community Church, I think, Grace Church is, I think that's going to be unique, that they get to see behind the curtain of how that went down. And that's one thing to accomplish when making this documentary, is that those who left our church or those who disagreed with our church could see the whole story, even behind the curtain. And I think the documentary does that. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Oh, we have questions. Let's see. Do you anticipate the government shutting down the church and public events again the next time there is an opportunity to do so? You think that's going to be their play again?
I think that unless we, as a people, explicitly decide that lockdown is not an appropriate strategy for dealing with respiratory virus pandemics, then that lockdown will be permanently a tool in the toolbox of our governments, and not just the American government, like governments worldwide. There have been attempts to try to do some evaluation, some post-mortem evaluation of the government response, and for the most part, it's been dispiriting to watch. Like many governments are thinking that they didn't lock down hard enough. I think that the lockdowns failed. I think that, but even if they didn't fail, they were tremendously destructive. So I think we face a choice as a people. Do we go down this path where biomedical security is like the guiding principle of how we organize our society, and the lockdowns will come back, or do we go down a path of a liberal society that respects the civil liberties of church-going people, of regular citizens, and others? I don't think those two are those two are not compatible with each other. Those two visions of what our society should be like are not compatible. And I'm really scared that we are going down the wrong path right now.
Yeah, I agree. Do we have any more questions? Or we got another one. So this person doesn't have a question, but they have a huge thank you. So we'll read it. For this informative and encouraging interview, we're driving a couple of hours in Ohio to Cincinnati on the 28th to watch the documentary. Well, thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah. We need to tell as many people as possible. We don't really have, it's not like we have advertising dollars. We're a church. We didn't really thought this was going to happen, and the next thing we know, we have a push for theatrical release. So we're just relying on word of mouth.
So Shannon, you should know that like a bunch of my friends texted me during that premiere event that the last weekend, where they're like, "Oh, I just saw this. I saw you in my church in this movie, Jay." So it's like, it's definitely, the word is definitely getting out.
Oh, that's cool. That's really neat. Yeah, it's in theaters this Friday. Buy tickets today at essentialmovie.com. We are so thankful for you, Jay, and thanks for being on. We really appreciate it. If you ever see Elon, tell him hi, and we'd love for him to watch the movie. I don't know how to get him the movie. I don't know if he's interested in this subject matter or not. I think he would. He's a pretty open-minded guy. I know he's not a Christian, but I think he would find perspective interesting and a different point of view. So that would be neat if you could see it. But anyway, thank you so much. Again, everybody, the movie comes out this Friday. Spread the word. You can get more information at essentialchurchmovie.com. It's there. You can find if there's a theater near you. And if there's not a theater near you, you know what you can do? You can actually bug the theater in your town up and say, hey, I want to see this theater. Because if they hear enough of that, and then we come around again and say, hey, do you want this movie in your theater? They're more likely to say yeah, having some demand for it. So that's one way you could help us. But nonetheless, go to essentialchurchmovie.com. You can subscribe there, put your email in, and then you can get updated on Blu-rays and DVDs in the future, and anything else going on with the Essential Church. Jay, thank you again so much. We really appreciate you. Thank you for being in the documentary. Thank you for taking the stand that you took. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon. God bless.
Thank you, Hannah. God bless you too.
God's truth is enduringly true throughout all the generations. It transcends culture. The church is always going to be an embattled people. If it's swimming with the tide, it's not being the church of Jesus Christ. Look to the past, learn from the past, because the whole world lies in the power of the evil one.
China has more than 200 confirmed cases of coronavirus, it's called.
The entire state of California ordered to stay at home. That's 40.
California has some of the strictest policies leveled against churches. Gavin Newsom's executive order threatens jail time and $1,000 a day fine.
Government stopping people from going to church, Dr. Fauci.
When I went into the White House, when I sat in on the task force meetings, was a shocking level of gross incompetence.
The mortality rate from the virus was 0.2%, 99.8% survival, rather than the 3 or 4% mortality that the people were saying at the time.
The culture and the understanding of the people of Grace Church has always been, not only do you obey government, but you honor government.
Thousands of people in the streets, but you can't have church?
The hypocrisy of letting people riot helped us all understand one thing. This is not what they say it is.
By meeting, we're testifying the government has no jurisdiction here. I was arrested and driven to a maximum security prison.
The government has obviously turned up the heat on churches.
My daddy.
When the churches fall silent, the only religion left is the state.
We needed to make a biblical statement because we always put ourselves under the authority of the Word of God.
LA County threatened Pastor John MacArthur with jail time and arrest.
We were going to be sued. They wanted Grace Church shut down.
We wanted to go on the offensive and attack the health order as unconstitutional. This wasn't about health and safety. This was all about control and opposition to religious freedom.
As the government gets more corrupt and more corrupt,
snitches get rewards.
its totalitarian control has to increase.
And you have to have a mask on.
And as they shut down any attacks against them,
this is not about freedom or personal choice.
The last thing standing is going to be the church.